What you are about to see is one of two presentations about the English system of royal succession and the English kings whose reigns provided the source for Shakespeare's 10 history plays. Hello, my name is Edward L. Rocklin, and I am a professor of English at Cal Poly Pomona. In this presentation, I will delineate some of the constitutive elements of the system by which the office of king was inherited, and I will describe how that system could generate a number of tensions and problems which could disrupt the very succession it was designed to ensure. The presentation that follows should help you understand the way in which each king tried to ensure the royal succession, preferably passing the crown on to his oldest son, but when that was not possible, to a member of his immediate family. In the period covered by all but one of Shakespeare's 10 history plays, the king was always a member of the family who held the throne since 1154. That family, although the name was not used until the last year of the dynasty, is the family we speak of as the Plantagenets. It is a remarkable fact that from the moment Henry II became king in 1154 until Richard III died in battle in 1485, a male descendant of Henry II always inherited the crown. This means that over a period of 331 years, the Plantagenets and the nobility of England made the system work. The name Plantagenet came from the badge adopted by the family and shown here. This was the broom plant, and it was known as the Planta Genesta, hence the name Plantagenet. But while the Plantagenets made that system work, that system also encountered problems, severe enough so that different branches of the family ended up fighting for the crown. And not only did the members of this family meet each other in a number of battles, but several of the kings found themselves in situations in which, either directly or indirectly, they brought about the death of a king, or ex-king, or a potential rival who was also a relative. Indeed, some of the Plantagenet kings were responsible for the deaths of nephews and cousins and uncles who threatened the succession of their own branch of the family. In the period covered in Shakespeare's 8 plays spanning the reign from Richard II to Richard III, the two branches fighting for control were the House of Lancaster and the House of York. So let's focus on the system of royal succession, that is, the process by which the office of king was inherited, and on the ways in which the system created tensions within the royal family. You will find these tensions vividly embodied in Shakespeare's plays, whether you read them in your classes or on your own. Most of you watching and listening to this presentation are citizens of a representative democracy, with an elected president who serves as both head of state and chief executive. And you will not have spent much time imagining yourself as a king or queen of a monarchy. You will not, for example, have spent much time imagining yourself in the position represented by this portrait of Queen Elizabeth I, opening Parliament in the 1560s. Nor in imagining the sort of real power Elizabeth could wield. Furthermore, in the present-day monarchies you hear about in the news, including the English monarchy, whose current ruler is Queen Elizabeth II of the House of Windsor, the monarch is, in fact, a ceremonial head of state with no executive power. Notice how this image of Queen Elizabeth II opening Parliament in 2000 is strikingly similar to the image of Queen Elizabeth I, 440 years ago, even though Elizabeth II has none of Elizabeth I's genuine political power. And because you're probably not expecting to become a monarch, you will not have thought about the imperatives inherent in holding the office of king or queen. But as is true of any system of government in which there is a single ruler, both in how it selects the person who is the head of state and in the power given to that person, the very nature of monarchical system creates specific imperatives that shape the fundamental choices made by any individual king or queen. Some monarchies have been elective, and in fact the English monarchy was at one time an elective monarchy. But most have been hereditary. And in a hereditary monarchy, the first, the simplest, and the most urgent imperative is to beget an heir. These imperatives operate even on rulers who try to resist such forces. For example, Queen Elizabeth I, who was on the throne during the first half of Shakespeare's career as a playwright, was celebrated as the Virgin Queen and presented herself as married not to an individual consort, but to her kingdom and to the welfare of her subjects. Elizabeth's commitment is represented in the ermine portrait, so called because of the small ermine, a symbol of virginity that sits on the queen's left arm. But by resisting the imperative to marry and to have a child to whom she could pass on the crown, Elizabeth provoked enormous anxiety in her subjects, who feared a return to the sort of internal war that had marred the previous century. This was a fear dramatized by Shakespeare's 8 major history plays, in which the battles caused by this dynastic conflict were vividly portrayed. These fears were probably made even more vivid for the Londoners who flocked to these plays in the 13 years before Queen Elizabeth I's death, a death memorialized in this picture of the funeral procession for Elizabeth's burial. The English monarchy was part of an encompassing social order which we have come to call patriarchy. In this order, women were subordinate to men, and it was assumed that the husband-father ruled over his family, including wife, children, and servants, as the king ruled over his kingdom. One of the famous images of this family is this group portrait of Sir Thomas More, wearing the chain of office of Lord Chancellor of the realm and surrounded by his father, wife, children, and servants. More specifically, the English social order in general, and the English monarchy in particular, embodied a system of inheritance that was patrilinear, and within that patrilinear structure followed a principle of primogeniture. Patrilinear means that in theory only males could inherit a title or the office of king, and primogeniture means that any noble title or office of king was inherited by the oldest son. This pattern was paralleled throughout the English aristocracy and gentry. In the nobility, among dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts, and barons, this meant that the eldest son inherited his father's title, rank, lands, and other sources of wealth. The second and subsequent sons might inherit lesser titles, some lands, some sources of wealth, but the bulk of the estate went to the eldest son. But since the office of king could not be divided, when it came to the monarchy, the principle was simple. The eldest son inherited the whole kingdom. Given this system, each king married, and usually he married a princess from a foreign royal family, and the king and queen sought to produce one or more male heirs. As the eldest son grew up, he was trained to become king. And if the king reached an age where death was imminent, or if he knew death was imminent for other reasons, he would seek to ensure that the nobility would remain loyal to his house, accepting the eldest son as heir to the throne. Within this system, there were two obvious ways for things to go wrong. The first and most devastating way was simply for a king to fail to produce a male heir. In that case, the throne might pass to the king's brother or a brother's son, or, as happened, to a sister's son. But if there was no male heir, that king's line might come to an end. In terms of our focus on Shakespeare's plays, this happened when the last direct descendant in the Plantagenet line, Richard III, whose only son had already died, was killed in battle. He was succeeded by the man who had defeated him, Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII. And it happened in Shakespeare's own lifetime when Elizabeth I, the last of the Tudors, died in 1603 and was succeeded by James Stuart, who was already King James VI of Scotland and who became King James I of England. James was the grandson of a sister of King Henry VIII, and thus was another case where the ruler did not succeed through direct descent from the male line. These facts also make it evident that with the high infant mortality rate, with the prevalence of lethal diseases, with the fact that the English monarchs through Richard III often personally led their armies into battle, having just one son as heir created a risky situation. The logical thing was to produce several male heirs to make sure of the succession. In fact, some of you remember that when Princess Diana, wife of Prince Charles, produced her second son, the tabloid press had headlines which announced that England now had an heir and a spare. But in the 15th and 16th centuries, even two male heirs was a thin margin, as Henry VII discovered when his older son, Prince Arthur, died suddenly, and Henry was left with only one son as heir to the throne. And, of course, that son, King Henry VIII, is notorious for marrying 6 times in his quest to produce one male heir. But, as this genealogy demonstrates, while Henry VIII's 3 children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, ruled in turn, none of them produced an heir, which explains why the Tudor dynasty, unlike the Plantagenets, lasted only 118 years. So the imperatives of this system of inheritance dictated that each king and his queen would seek to produce 2 or more sons to ensure that his direct line inherited the throne. But it was also the case that producing a larger number of sons was the second way in which the system could generate tensions and problems. I hope you'll join me for the next presentation, when we examine how having many sons might become a problem in this English system of royal succession. My name is Edward L. Rocklin. Goodbye till next time.